Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kelly Kiedis Ogborn, and I am Vice President of Space Commerce and Entrepreneurship at Space Foundation. And we're so happy that you are joining us today for this workshop as we dive into entrepreneurship opportunities in the new space economy. There is no better time to become part of the global space ecosystem. And what I find extremely exciting about this moment in space is how fast it's growing and really how broad it's becoming. And benefiting from this vibrant industry then requires reimagining the space economy itself. We are extremely fortunate to live in a time where the moon and Mars are no longer a wish, they are a fact. And while we still have a long way to go to build out our ultimate vision for the space economy and interplanetary exploration, where we are rooted now is building that future and benefiting from that future. One thing we always say at Space Foundation is that there is a place for everyone in space. Whether you are in more traditional verticals of space, such as launch, satellites, telecommunications and broadband, and IT and infrastructure, or in more emerging space adjacent markets, such as agriculture, climate surveillance, biotech, healthcare, energy, AR, VR, etc., it is going to take the totality of creativity and the ecosystem to really grow and sustain the future of space. And so the goal of this workshop will illuminate at a high level what the space economy is, what opportunities are available, and strategies to take part in it. Let's dive into the content. As a guiding principle, space has no shortage of strategic vision. And we are really only limited by our creativity and how to take advantage of the opportunities. This three-part workshop series is for you to know where your idea, product, or service fits within the space ecosystem and how to create a tangible and practical roadmap for insertion and growth. Before we jump further into the content, I would like to go over a few guiding principles which will really help define why space is a good entrepreneurial focus. The first is that the prospect of space is no longer just for companies led by tech experts or space enthusiasts. And increasingly, disparate and different industries are recognizing that the gap precluding everyday citizens from entering the global space ecosystem is really getting smaller by the day. The second is that the global space ecosystem has created new channels for commerce to flow and for business to be done, and really has become the pioneering home for new products, services, and approaches that are redefining critical infrastructure while also creating new jobs and innovations that benefit more people than ever before. And the third is a really interesting statistic. So the economy today is about 55% higher than it was just a decade ago. And it is producing more entrepreneurial opportunity than ever before. But also the parameters of the global space ecosystem have expanded. It has been diversified by players, investment, and really funding interest. In 2021, we saw about $20 billion of private investment put into space ventures. And over the past 15 years, that venture money has been diversified by orbits. So what that means is that traditionally we saw a lot of investment in geostationary orbit. You can think about the satellites that power our everyday life. But now we are really seeing it expand beyond to low Earth orbit and medium Earth orbit, as well as suborbital ventures, as you're probably aware with space tourism, as well as lunar and deep space ventures. So it's a very, very exciting time in space. And then lastly, this lively economy has really made room for people of diverse aptitudes and talents to really take their place within it. And you need to recognize that the future will require the passion, innovation, and imagination of a diverse array of skill sets and backgrounds to grow and sustain the future. And so what this workshop will focus on is really three main parts. Part one, we'll go over what is the new space ecosystem and economy. The second are business considerations. And the third are strategies for growth for you to engage in your everyday entrepreneurial principles. So first, let's look at what is the global space economy. It has been postured that the global space economy is going to reach about 1 trillion by the year 2040. And one thing that is worth considering is how we define the space economy. It is really three main parts. It is everything that physically goes into space, everything that supports systems and operations in space, and it is all terrestrial, so earthbound, economic activities that are directly enabled by space. And when you look at this 1 trillion number by 2040, people often think that that seems very large and very unattainable. But what they don't realize is that we are almost halfway there. The global space economy was valued at $469 billion in 2021. This number is the space economy number that is put out by the Space Foundation, and we will be updating this number actually in end of July. So be on the lookout for the new value within 2022. But one thing to note here is just the tremendous growth that we see year after year. So there was a 9% growth in 2021 over the 2020 numbers, and there are already 77 global space programs happening around the world. But what's interesting to note that there are 90 countries operating in space. So even if countries do not have an established space agency, they do have space offices or space programs that they engage with daily to be able to figure out how their infrastructure, their technologies, their ecosystem plays within the future growth of the space ecosystem. And really, what's driving this economic viability is there are two main market distinctions. There is the space to Earth market and the space to space market. So, the space to Earth market are goods and services produced in space for use on Earth. This includes everything from telecommunications and internet infrastructure, weather data, GPS, any sort of national security satellites, and also technologies derived from space investment, as well as research and development that is not necessarily used in space related fields. The second main market distinction is the space to space market, which are goods and services produced in space for use in space. This is really more future oriented and exploratory. You can think of this as the moon, any sort of lunar outpost, asteroid mining, launching capabilities to maneuver from one orbit to another, construction of space habitats, refueling depots, etc. What's interesting about this market is this is the one that really catches headlines and investment. This is the one that gets people excited. But this market is also in its infancy to get off the ground because there are significant technical achievements that need to be accomplished for this sector to thrive. The space to space market, certainly pushes the boundaries and limits of what is possible because there is significant investment, trial and error, and really the limitless intelligence of the people working through these problems. I truly believe that this market will give us better processes, better components, and really other technological achievements and investments that will trickle down into our everyday life. However, to really be prosperous within space, we must view the Earth through the space to Earth market. And the reason for that is that that market is responsible for about 95% of all ROI within space. And this really comes a lot from the utilization of satellite data. This is being exploited in a lot of ways, everything from environmental assessment. Anytime you use GPS or you access your phone or any sort of app, that is utilizing space-based data. But also, the space to Earth market and the conditions in space are uniquely situated for manufacturing and research applications that are totally out of reach on Earth. For example, it is possible to manufacture medical devices of the size and sophistication necessary to implant in the retina, or they can be used to advance an osteoporosis treatment and the prevention of muscle and bone atrophy. There have also been really interesting developments of superalloys that are durable and stable enough for application in nuclear power reactors and rocket engines. So as we are starting to look toward the commercialization of space with different commercial space stations and low Earth orbit activity, a lot of companies and individuals are realizing there are ways to utilize space to benefit their businesses here on Earth. What that means for you and your business and understanding how to take advantage of these capabilities is really knowing when these opportunities will be available. And that comes from unlocking market potential. What I will touch upon on this slide is technologically what is required to truly unlock commerce activities within these orbits. So, within low Earth orbit, which is the closest to us, this really boasts a lot of economic activity and a lot of current focus. There are a few drivers for this. There is the small sat market, which we know through, SpaceX, Starlink. And there is also a lot of focus being put on space access. And this is things like suborbital spaceflight, space tourism, as well as the utilization of satellites on things like remote sensing and satellite analytics, such as Earth observation, climate monitoring apps, which I mentioned before. And also commercial space stations. I touched upon this briefly on the last slide, but these are really going to garner a lot of attention and a lot of opportunity. These commercial space stations are privately owned space stations that are commissioned by NASA and working in collaboration with NASA that will continue on the work and the research missions of the International Space Station, but they will also allow private companies and individual citizens to be able to rent out space and conduct their own manufacturing and research opportunities. And this area is really a growing and vibrant marketplace. And in order to see it truly come to life, there are really 5 technical challenges that must be overcome to open up opportunity. 4 are related to launch, and 1 is related to reentry. So, in order for low Earth orbit to truly become commercially viable, we need to have rockets that are reusable. So, essentially extending the vehicle lifespan. They have to be reliable. So, that looks at lowering the risk associated with each launch and the subcomponents of the rockets. If you're going to be putting something on a rocket, whether it's a person or a payload, you obviously want to make sure that it's going to get there. They need to be routine. So companies need to really be able to make plans based on a routine schedule. And they also need to have a quick turnaround time. The routine equation can really be paralleled to what it's like to get on an airplane. It's become as ubiquitous as scheduling a time, showing up at the airport, and knowing that it will take off most of the time. The same thing needs to be true with rockets. And then they also have to be cheap. In order to truly unlock opportunities within space, the cost of it cannot preclude everyday citizens and small companies from taking advantage of it. And then the 5th piece in all of this is reentry. A lot of folks think that it is maybe not so difficult to get things down from space. It is actually truly difficult. So the reentry issue is probably the 5th piece that needs to be cracked in order to truly unlock opportunity within low Earth orbit. The good news story for this is that the launch equation is almost cracked. We have a lot of great companies, a lot of launch startups that are really focusing on this. And so the next evolution is to really consider, once that becomes a reality, what can you then do in space? The next orbit to focus on is medium Earth orbit and geostationary orbit. And similarly, this will require technological advancements to unlock market potential. But what we are looking for here is really being able to travel from low Earth orbit to medium Earth orbit. And what that's going to require are spacecrafts that will need to be able to refuel and receive other services in space. So we're talking about things like repair and maintenance. One of the buzzwords that you will hear if you're paying attention to the space ecosystem is ISAM. It stands for In-Orbit Servicing and Manufacturing. It is actually a really critical area that is being discussed because, again, you need to untether from the Earth's surface. If we are truly going to have commerce activities and business activities, we cannot be reliant on shipping things constantly from the Earth's surface up. And so we need to be able to have robotic manufacturing stations. We need to be able to potentially recycle space junk to take advantage of other manufacturing components. And we also need to be able to power things in space. And then lastly, we are looking at beyond. So when I talk about this, I'm really talking about cislunar operations to Mars. The topic cislunar and the word cislunar really means the moon. So anything from Earth to the moon and then the moon beyond. And really at that point, the next wave of technological maturation and really where the business opportunities are going to go is to be able to sustain long-term human life support. So human beings at this point will be spending increasingly long amounts of time in space, and accessing these very distant orbits will require strides in supporting health and well-being on long voyages and also in these unpredictable hostile environments. So any industry that is involved in sustaining human lives on Earth will be implicated in sustaining human lives in space. And so these are sectors like energy, healthcare, space habitats, creature comforts. What I mean by that term is allowing people to feel more connected to their families, feel more sort of normalcy when they're in these conditions. Environmental assessment is another big one. How do you test the air? How do you test the soil? How do you test any sort of liquids that are encountered? As well as agriculture to be able to grow and sustain food supplies. And these will become sectors that are going to be further involved in the space industry. And what's interesting about this is that many of these are fully fleshed out in their verticals that they already exist. And all it's going to take is figure out how to do a potential pivot in the offering service or product to transition into space. What's also really interesting about this area is that the workforce of the future and the industries engaged will be incredibly profoundly intertwined and complex. And so it's really going to take, as I mentioned before, the totality of everyone working together to build this future outcome. So after highlighting these, the technological capabilities necessary to unlock opportunity, let's really look at the 10 economic drivers of the new space economy as put forth by Morgan Stanley. And one thing that's worth mentioning is that these drivers are really notable for their variation, so how different they are from each other, as much as they are for their cutting edge technological positioning. And as I move through these, I want you to think of the downstream capabilities and technologies necessary to grow and sustain each. So, what the term downstream capabilities means is that it's anything that's on Earth that can take advantage of space assets. So, the first of these is satellite launch, which most people within the space industry and not in the space industry know what this is. But some of the areas and industries that are necessary to grow and sustain its future potential is everything from energy, so looking at new propellants and new fuels, as well as digital engineering, so being able to keep communications between the ground stations and the rocket, as well as service and repair. The next is satellite internet. We touched upon this briefly on some of the previous slides, but with the mention of SpaceX's Starlink. But there are going to be a lot more satellites put into low Earth orbit that will allow better latency and better coverage worldwide. One of the things that this will bring to bear is that there will be so much data that is collected and available on these satellites, but not necessarily processed for unique and different ways. And so one of the things that is necessary to grow and sustain this is everything from data quantification as well as data storage. That's actually going to be a really, really hot entrepreneurial opportunity in the next 5 to 10 years. The third is deep space exploration. And this is one that gets people very excited because it conjures up images of lunar outposts and Mars colonies. But really, what's going to be necessary to grow and sustain these are things like studying effects of gravity on the human body. We have a fair amount of quantifiable data from astronauts being on board the ISS. But when we are now pushing for longer duration on these unfamiliar terrains like the moon and Mars, this is going to be really critical. Another area is food engineers and agriculture. So again, being able to grow food, sustain life, create medicinal properties, creature comforts, we touched upon before, environmental assessment, I touched upon before, but also the aspect of refueling. So being able to keep satellites fueled, depots fueled, heat sources fueled, that's going to be a really critical one to crack. The fourth is the lunar landing, which has gotten a lot more attention most recently with NASA's reemergence of going back to the moon through the Artemis mission. And this is going to require everything again from energy, but also looking at energy storage and potentially solar components to this. We take for granted on Earth the fact that we have electrical outlets, and you have to ask yourself, how do you power things in space? The next piece of this is going to be construction. So infrastructure, the development of that, different properties to be able to construct habitats that will withstand the elements. robotics and autonomy, mainly used as companions to people, but also for manufacturing operations and different services. Agriculture is another big one. Space medicine. So, how do we keep people healthy and how do we anticipate for future needs? And this can be everything from vitamins and nutrition, but also surgeries. That's where potential robotics also comes in. If there's an ability to do robotic surgeries or have some sort of automation where there are machines that can handle a whole host of different needs. Biometrics is another big one. Artificial intelligence, of course, this plays into the creature comforts, but also comes into mission planning and being able to do mission projection, developers, as well as transportation. And then the fifth one on this slide is Earth observation. And this comes back to this idea of data storage and being able to use satellites. Earth observation has actually been a really critical vertical that a lot of people are paying attention to and utilizing for things beyond just looking at the Earth. But we have been able to do things like mitigating fires, being able to track floods, looking at agricultural yields. And so it's really been able to benefit the health and the sustainment of life on Earth. But we're also looking here for things, again, like data storage, data crunching, data usage, and being able to attach to use cases on Earth for various and impactful ways. Moving on with the 10 economic drivers. The next on this slide is asteroid mining. And this one is extremely exciting because this conjures up a lot of interest in the space ecosystem, primarily because people hear the word asteroid mining. They've been told that some asteroids that exist have more platinum than exists globally. And while that is true, one of the reasons why asteroid mining is part of the 10 economic drivers is it's not so much mining for platinum for pure capitalistic sake, but it's more looking for space resources. And so this is pretty much water. So being able to sustain life in space, as I mentioned before, the space to space market. And one of the areas that we really need to consider to make this a reality is storage and transportation solutions of this water. There also are energy solutions for the ability to be able to drill these asteroids and extract the water. Construction companies will also be critical, as well as ways to take these minerals and these rare earths and create them into new manufacturing properties. The next is space debris, also known as space junk. And this is an economic driver really for two main areas. One is because of the entrepreneurial opportunities it does bring to bear, but also for all the policy considerations that it drives. The fact of the matter is, and it's no shock to anybody, that there is a lot of debris and junk in space. And this is a problem for future launches, for any sort of satellites that we want to put up in low Earth orbit, but it also creates potential hazardous and really dangerous environments within space for anyone flying within it, and also any of our critical infrastructure. And so in this area, there is a major opportunity for people to come in as space traffic managers and debris tracking to be able to tell where this debris is, how to maneuver around it, but also around the recyclability and the ability to capture the debris and use it potentially for different manufacturing properties, or just different ways to bring it back down. So this is an area that is getting a lot of attention and actually a lot of investment because it is only going to become more of a problem as we start to utilize low Earth orbit in the ways that we want to. The next is space tourism. And this is one like asteroid mining that gets people very excited, specifically because we have seen successful suborbital flights with Blue Origin and Virgin Orbit and Virgin Galactic. But space tourism, it goes really beyond launch companies. So what this is looking at is everything from commercial space stations, which we talked about before, but it's also going to implicate industries like hospitality, medical, real estate. For some of these commercial space stations, you might be able to lease a unit or be able to lease facilities to be able to do manufacturing and research on board or other research and development. The media around this is a really critical aspect. So how do you tell the story of why this is impactful? Robotics is going to be really critical, particularly around orbital assembly, as we talked about before with manufacturing, as well as complex coding and developers. The next is space research. And this is because we need to be able to quantify and also qualify why we are doing all this activity in space and what it means for future markets. And so this is going to require everything from economists, journalism and media majors, as well as writers to be the next great space storytellers. And then the last driver is manufacturing. And the reason this is up here is that manufacturing is obviously a very well established, very staid community and industry globally. However, when we are talking about manufacturing in space, what we are talking about is 4D tailoring and really being able to replace parts. So this is going to be everything from new properties that we could bring in, as well as material miniaturization and also making it more lightweight. And so what I want you to think about as we moved through these drivers is, where do you fit within them? Obviously, these are top level verticals, but there are lots of industries, lots of sustainment areas to explore, but also lots of ways that you could disrupt these ecosystems and make them more viable to your product path. So spend some time thinking about how your capability, your creativity, and your ideas can really help grow and sustain these areas. Now that we've gone over from a high level what the space economy is, let's now dive into business considerations for you. And really, what these are fundamental questions to ask yourself when thinking about your business and how you can make good and focused decisions for entering the global space economy. The first thing you have to understand is that it doesn't have to be rocket science. One of the challenges we have in the space industry is that we talk to ourselves a lot. We talk in acronyms, we talk in statistics, and it often does not make sense to those on the outside. We also have the problem that people self-select out often because they are not a rocket scientist and they are not technically inclined. And that is really discouraging, because you do not have to be part of space. It is going to require the imagination, the creativity of every background, skill set, and interest to really grow and sustain where we are going. And so please keep that in the back of your mind, that there is a place for you in space, and the next slides will illuminate how to create your strategy to take part of it. The next consideration is that you do not have to be everything to everyone. And what's interesting to me is that almost everyone has heard of this term, and a lot of businesses really try to avoid it, but they end up in a cycle where it becomes unavoidable. And the reason for this is that they become committed to a path early on that sets them up for it. And it really sets them up for this: throwing spaghetti against a wall. It's really tempting for new companies or even existing companies moving into a new product line or a market to try to be everything to everyone. And this really happens for a few reasons. The first is that you're still defining exactly what it is you plan to offer, or you're strapped for cash, so every opportunity seems like a good opportunity, or you're just very excited and you want to try to do everything. The problem is that when you try to be everything to everyone, it will be hard to find consistency within your own strategy, because going after different lines of business requires different approaches and different growth opportunities. It also makes it difficult for others to remember what it is you do and what you offer if it feels very scattered and varied. And it's okay, and you have to remind yourself, it is okay to not offer what someone might want, because there will be someone who does want what you're selling. And so what you need to be is clear, you need to be precise, and you also need to be laser focused in going after what you want and what makes the most sense for your business. And so what we're about to walk through are the elements of a good, repeatable strategy. It will focus on what you should include, but also what you shouldn't, no matter what industry you're going after or service you'd like to provide. What I'll talk about are the crucial questions that you must be able to answer before you do anything, the type of research you should be conducting for any and all opportunities, and the elements of a strategy timeline, as well as how to properly get your message across in all correct forms. At the end of this video, you should have the fundamental components and know the groundwork necessary to begin to grow and execute your own strategy. So let's start with the foundational questions. Before you begin anything, We need to address why you are in business and why you plan to go into business in the first place. And you must be able to answer these 6 questions because they will be the foundation upon everything else that you build. So the first is, what problem are you trying to solve? And you want to think about this from the perspective of the customer, not from your point of view. Even though there will and should be some overlap, you want to get your answers to this question in a language that more closely reflects the customer's, because that will help you tell a more compelling story. The second is you want to know your value proposition to the client. This is really the reason you exist and why people should care about what you do. If you don't have a good answer to this, do not go any further, because your value proposition will get weaved throughout your entire business narrative and ultimately help shape your final strategy. It also informs who you go after as customers. We are going to talk about value proposition in depth later, and I will provide a formula for it to make it easy and repeatable. The next question you want to ask is, what is the market applicability? It is helpful here to start broad and then narrow down into the specific subsets of each market. Also, I want to challenge you to get creative. You really need to think beyond the obvious markets that your product or service fits into and try to imagine if there are components of your offering that fit into new and adjacent markets. The next is, why is it better than what already exists? If you are moving into a crowded market space with a lot of competition, chances are that your potential customers are being courted by competitors or are also already working with your competitors. So, how do you convince them to work with you instead? What you want to do is spend some time thinking about the problem you are trying to solve. And remember, it's from the respective client's point of view. And you want to be able to clearly articulate why you are better. The next is, who are your potential customers? So further breaking them down into specific subsets of potential markets, you really want to get granular on the who, because you need to make sure there are actual tangible customers within your markets of interest. And then the last question you want to ask is, when will it be market ready? And this is essentially, when can customers engage with it? So after you lay these foundational questions, you're going to want to define your approach. And what this really looks like are your goals and what you are looking to sell. So the first is, do you have an idea that you'd like to get government funding for? And this could be where you have a hypothesis that you need initial grant money to develop, or you have an existing product or technology that really needs refinement and that the government could use. Or are you looking to sell a service? Do you offer specialized staffing or skills, or do you have software to sell? That is also an approach. Or do you want to integrate your product into a larger company's offering? Are you able to enhance what's currently being done or change something that exists into doing things new and better? That is also an approach. It's important to really hone in to the type of business you want to build while also being realistic about what you have the capacity to build, because you really want to be able to identify what a good opportunity is versus a bad one, and also know what you are truly able to execute on and scale. So what you want to do is think about where your strengths lie. Not every potential or market will be a good fit, and not every market is right for you, and that's okay. So knowing where to focus and what to ignore is actually really powerful, because it will save you time, money, and energy. And so ask yourself if your product fits the market need that you have assumed, predicted, or expected. And if the answer is no, then you need to move on. And you need to continue to ask yourself this question throughout your entire entrepreneurial journey and allow yourself to pivot where necessary. Also worth noting is that if a government or a customer is your desired path, you really want to try to focus on affordability when presenting your option. And this tactic will really help increase your chances of winning and getting a follow-on contract. So now that we've pinpointed the kind of business that you'd like to have and what offering you will be giving, let's talk about strategies to help you grow. There are 4 main components that we will go over in this section. It is research, a timeline to move your goals forward, how to distinguish yourself, and then tips for networking. So the first area is research. And there are many, many, many things that you can conduct research on, but I suggest that at a minimum, you address the four following areas. The first is funding trends, and you want to know the funding trends of all of the agencies and companies that are of interest to you. And the reason for this is that it's helpful to know what their future priorities are going to be and how your ideas and goals insert into them. You can find this information out by continually monitoring news about them. You can also set up Google News alerts about them. But what I would also do is monitor the trends in markets that your service falls into and that their service falls into. So you can also see the largest players, who they are, and who continues to be of increased importance in this field. Another reason why you should monitor funding trends is that the current markets and opportunities might not stay the same, and you need to be able to follow the bouncing ball and essentially follow the money. The second piece you need to do research on are desired capabilities. I have seen it before with businesses that there is a really strong desire to work with a particular government agency or a company, regardless if their product, service, or goals really align with your priorities and what they actually fund. And so you want to be able to match the types of things that they work on to your capabilities and levels of expertise. Some agencies or companies want to fund more early stage or developmental work, some want integration, or some may just want to acquire a product. And so knowing this can save you a lot of wasted time and headaches in the future by going after an opportunity that might be interesting to you, but is not the right fit. The next piece are current initiatives. So you want to be able to read about current programs and also understand what their immediate priorities are and how you can align yourself within them. And then the last is a timeline. You want to know what new opportunities might mean for your business in terms of a timeline. If you are looking at going after government funding to get your business off the ground, it's important to know how long it will take to get the contract award and dispersed funds, which sometimes can be upward to 6 months. So you want to be able to build in adequate time for all opportunities to come to fruition and have a backup plan on other things in case you need that financial capital to keep you afloat. We will dig into how to build a timeline in a second. You might be asking yourself, why am I doing all of this research? What are the goals? And if nothing else, it should be these three things. The first is the primary focus of the agencies and the companies of interest. You need to know these. As mentioned before, you should set up news alerts for topic areas of interest and also continually monitor the websites for press releases and anything else outlining initiatives. Second, you want to have a good idea of who the best point of contact is for your initiatives of interest. You want to make a list of personnel and their portfolios, goals, and potential for future work and preferred method of communication. That is really critical because you want to meet people where they are, and you also want to make sure that you're talking to the right people. And then lastly, you want to take note of critical due dates and deadlines if you are applying to anything time sensitive in the future. Now, once you've conducted your necessary research and you know the type of business you'd like to build, now it's time to create an engagement timeline. And my suggestion is to start with your top 3 goals. And you need to be as clear as you can with what these are. For example, are you trying to win a particular grant? Or are you trying to integrate a product with a certain company? Or are you trying to get a services contract? That will then dictate to you when you need to accomplish these by and when you would like to accomplish these by. And you need to be as specific as possible. You need to get down to the month and year and also the quarter within a particular year. Then what you're going to want to do is create a timeline working backwards with all of those goal deadlines in mind, noting everything that you need to do to be successful. I usually create a timeline for a 12-month time period, but you should use any type of planning increment that will work for you in your business. And so within that 12-month timeline, these are the main elements that you need to include. The reason I touch on these is that oftentimes these are included in a strategy, but they are not done with intentionality, or a company utilizes many different timelines that focus on different things. They might have one that is looking at a product timeline or an outreach timeline, or a timeline for business goals, but I argued that all of these need to be included in the same timeline so you know the totality of the workload that you're working with. Because sometimes not seeing all of these side by side increases your chances of pushing off certain elements or seemingly small tasks that might make all the difference to your success will just fall off the cliff. The other reason you should build them in is it really gives you a realistic look into how much work you need to do to achieve success and how much work might fall into certain months. This will allow you to assess your capabilities and reprioritize your goals as either necessary or not necessary without letting anything fall off the wagon. So for each goal, what you need to do is include these 6 elements relating to it in your engagement timeline. And at the end, your engagement timeline will reflect all of your goals and all the work necessary to achieve them. So the first element of these is your schedule of engagements. And this is really looking at important due dates. So this can be anything from pitch meetings, grant submissions, application submissions, when you want to solicit a specific company, anything of that nature. And these really act as the anchors in your strategy because oftentimes they are immovable and they will dictate the pace of your work in the months prior to prepare for them. The next are your elements of engagement. So who are you contacting specifically? Think back to the POCs, the point of contact goal within your research, and how often you are contacting them. An example of this would be, say, you're going after an agency grant that is due in June of 2024, and you know who the program manager is that handles the portfolio. So it would be wise to include in your engagement strategy that you should reach out for a meeting to discuss the priorities of your solution, potentially in March or April of that same year, to allow yourself time to amend your offering if necessary, given the feedback, and also before the grant application drops and when you're in this window where you're actually not able to discuss anything with them for legal reasons. But building in these human interactions are also necessary for success because you want to make it a human strategy. Business is still run by people, and being able to have these conversations and not just infer what you think questions are for you will allow you to be more successful. Oftentimes, this people engagement is ad hoc. So people won't actually build it into their strategy, but they'll all of a sudden remember that they need to contact someone. And it really needs to be intentional because it'll also focus on the frequency, the mode, and so build it into your strategy and also build up your follow-up plan. The third component of this is promotion. And this is really looking at ways that you can become a better known entity to increase your chances of accomplishing your business goal. This would be anything from conferences that you need to attend to make the right connections, articles you need to write, or newsletters you need to get written up. You need to understand that these take a lot of time and they should also be built into your strategy to ensure that these efforts aren't pushed aside due to more pressing issues, especially if they can prove to be vital to your business success goals and people knowing who you are. The fourth is your development timeline. So this is really applicable for companies who are working on a product or service. Knowing your progress and when you will achieve certain milestones will allow you to build in the rest of your work around them. An example of this would be if you're working on a propulsion technology, for example, and you won't have your minimum viable product completed until Q2 of 2024. Your potential customers said that they'd like to talk to you once you've completed your MVP. So knowing when this anchor is, you will be able to build engagement into that timeline and any preliminary work like a pitch deck, research on client meetings, etc., into the previous months. Because technical work generally takes a lot of time, knowing when your busy months will be completing this critical work, because that is the core part of your product or service, it will allow you to plan everything else around it accordingly. The next is your internal resources necessary for success. And these are all of the things that allow you to fill your success. An example of this would be, say you're a data analytics company that wants to provide real-time insights to your clients. So in your pitch, you promise immediate reports created by an in-house staff analysis, and you get 3 new clients. The problem is you might only have 1 analyst that can't handle that volume. And so, what you should have been doing is interviewing new analysts to have them in the pipeline already so that you're ready to hire when these clients come on board. You need to be ready to jump when the opportunity presents itself. So, you want to take stocks of all the gaps that you have in fulfilling your goals once you achieve them and make sure that you are making headway on those daily. And then lastly, it's funding necessary to keep the company alive. This really goes down to knowing what you need and when you will run out. So, this will inform all aspects of your engagement strategy because if you don't have money, you don't have a business. It will also allow you to better understand what your goals look like for the longevity of your company. As mentioned before, there are really long wait times to get government money dispersed. So just knowing how much you need and how much your off ramp is will really allow you to better engage a thoughtful strategy moving forward. The next piece you want to do is you want to distinguish yourself. And this really looks at how do you differentiate yourself from competition and communicate your value and impact to potential clients. What we are going to talk about now are the basic written items that you'll need and really some tricks to enhancing your network endeavors and perhaps actually enjoy them. So, for written materials, at a minimum, you will need a white paper, a value proposition, and a pitch deck. And all of these will have some reusable and interchangeable information, but the message will be crafted specifically to speak to the intended audience. And all of them will include your value proposition. So, for those of you that are new to business or perhaps have been in business but haven't really spent time creating a solid value proposition, I have a really easy formula for you to follow. A value proposition isn't just the product or service that you agree to deliver to the customer. It's the ingredient of your business that solves a problem that your competitors can't. It is what makes your company unique. Without it, customers don't have a reason to work with you over someone else. So please spend some time writing and rewriting your value proposition. And also remember that it may slightly change based on your customers' needs and how they evolve. Generally, a value proposition formula has three parts. It's your customer's need and why they could benefit from your solution, and why it's the best option. And in addition to that three-part formula, there are really four golden rules of a value proposition that should help you craft one. The first is that it needs to be short. It needs to be easy to understand, and it needs to be to the point. The next is that it must communicate why you are different and better, not just the problem and solution. It also needs to communicate specific results. So this is really talking about the benefit and the impact to the intended customer. And then lastly, it should be simple. You want others to easily understand it and be able to repeat it. As mentioned in the very beginning of this workshop, you really don't want to be everything to everyone. And if others can easily articulate your value, it really helps increase your chances of success and helps you become a known entity. So now that you have your value proposition, what do you put it in? I mentioned before that you need white papers, and there will be a resource link to this video that will give you a white paper outline and structure to download. But you also will put it into your pitch deck. And a pitch deck is a quick snapshot of your company and service for marketing and presentations. As for all materials that we talked about, it is highly customizable and personal, but at a minimum, I recommend including the following sections in your pitch deck. You first want to start with a slide about your company. So who you are, why you got into business, and anything else about your story that you think is relevant. Really use this section to talk about you, get them invested in your background, and also why you are the best to solve this solution. The next is your vision. So this is really looking at what you are trying to achieve, and this is where you want to put your value proposition. The next are your potential clients' problems and your solution, followed by the opportunity to the potential client and the benefit of your product and service. And then lastly, it's next steps. You never want to leave this slide out. And this is a common mistake that I see a lot of companies make. You do not want to put the onus on who you're talking to figure out how to work with you next. So you want to lay out, do you want an introduction to someone? Are you looking for funding? Do you want to set up a follow-up meeting? Definitely ask the question, because that will then help lay the groundwork for where the relationship furthers from there. Other elements that could be included in your pitch deck, depending on where you are with your business. Some companies also put in an investment timeline. So looking at money raised and money that they hope to raise. Other companies, if they are particularly heavily hardware or infrastructure oriented, they put a technology development timeline. So letting people know where they are in their build and where they're going. But these are generally the areas of a fundamental basic pitch deck that you should have, and then definitely iterate based on how your company grows and where you want to go. And lastly, we are going to talk very quickly about some networking tips to help you make the most of your entrepreneurial journey. And the reason that we discuss these is really for two reasons. The first is so that you get the most out of your time spent, and also to make networking more bearable. There are some people that really don't enjoy it. And then the next piece is because you want to put a strategy and tactics behind your networking so it's done with intentionality. So the first tip is to do your research. Whenever possible, research who will be attending the event so that you can be intentional about who you'd like to meet. Instead of wandering from random conversation to random conversation, hoping that one of them will be productive, this will allow you to pinpoint certain people that you want to get information from, or have conversations with someone that might give you a little bit more knowledge for your background. This is also really helpful if you don't love engaging with strangers and you don't love networking, because knowing a little bit about some of the folks in advance will make them feel less like strangers and more like, familiar, warm leads. The next piece is to have a goal. And what you really want to do is you want to approach networking like you would a project. Much like you do your research for any sort of project that you conduct, you can be more intentional with who you engage and perhaps not even have to stay the entire time. If you go to an event and you know that you want to talk to two particular people and you're able to connect with them in the first 30 minutes, it really allows you to expedite your time and potentially then enjoy the rest of the time more, or use your time for something else. The next is that you want to know your audience and dress accordingly. Automatically blending in with the particular vibe and atmosphere will help create an easier pathway for conversation, and it will also help you feel more at ease. There are many different segments within the space ecosystem. If you are talking to a tech developer, if you are talking to any sort of agency or corporate rep, or someone who may be developing policy, they all have different dress codes that they apply to. One suggestion that I give for people, if they don't actually know, is use layers to your advantage. You can always err on the side of more formality and then take off a tie or take off a blazer if you realize that it's more of a casual event. The next, and my personal favorite, and probably the most important up here, is to be open to new paths. Sometimes the ideal person to engage is not who you originally thought it would be. So you need to be open to conversations, even if the connection doesn't seem immediately obvious, especially if you were introduced to that person by someone else you were hoping to talk to. You were clearly introduced to them for a reason, so please give the conversation a chance and see what is unveiled. And then lastly, do not approach networking as transactional. You will be much more successful if you treat these newly formed relationships like friendships and less like pure business transactions. You need to approach this and be engaged, be interested, and make sure you follow up and share articles that might be of value to them. People want to do business with those that they like, and so share something about yourself, learn something about others, and discover ways to partner and work together. It will make networking much more bearable. It will actually make it enjoyable, and it will increase the people in your surrounding area that you can learn from and potentially collaborate with in the future. And that concludes our first workshop on entrepreneurial opportunities in the new space ecosystem. If you've enjoyed the content and have further questions, we will be conducting a live question and answer session July 19th, which is a Wednesday, at 11 a.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Central European Summer Time. Additionally, there will be 2 more workshops coming on in this series, and the next workshop will be available on August 9th, which will touch on how to create a winning strategy, scale an idea, and secure funding. We will talk about common mistakes when developing business ideas, how you can find funding, and how you can develop a real-world business model. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
In JSEP, young entrepreneurs utilize newly gained knowledge to identify and solve space industry problems through business development. Become a community advocate and inspire future space entrepreneurs.